Story 1. The Shadow Room. There is a certain thrill that comes with checking into a hotel room, especially when the corridors are silent and every surface gleams with the promise of privacy and comfort. But for travelers who have spent enough nights away from home, there is also an uncanny sense of displacement, a feeling that the unfamiliar walls might conceal secrets you'd rather not uncover. For one guest, that feeling would shape an unforgettable night in what became known, at least in their memory, as the Shadow Room. On a rainy evening, a business traveler named Marcus arrived at the old stately hotel set back from the main road. The lobby was warm and inviting, accented by the soft glow of antique chandeliers and the gentle hum of conversation. He checked in, collected his key, and made his way to the fourth floor, where his room waited at the end of a winding hallway. The air grew cooler as he walked, and the sound of his footsteps seemed to echo, even though the carpet was thick and muffled noise. Marcus entered room 427, instantly noticing a peculiar chill, a dampness that didn't match the rest of the building. Shrugging it off as a quirk of old construction, he unpacked, drew the curtains, and settled in for the night. But as the hours passed, he could not shake the sensation that he was not alone. The shadows in the room seemed to move, stretching and shrinking with each flicker of the streetlights outside. At midnight, Marcus awoke to a soft whisper, barely more than the rustle of fabric. He sat up, heart pounding, peering into the darkness. The room was filled with deep, shifting shadows, and he was certain he saw movement in the far corner. The shape was indistinct, tall, thin, and impossibly dark. It hovered for a moment, then slid along the wall, dissolving and reforming as it moved, never quite touching the light from the bedside lamp. Frozen in place, Marcus tried to rationalize what he saw. Perhaps his mind was playing tricks, conjuring nightmares from the unfamiliar setting, but the air grew colder, his breath visible in the dim glow. He reached for his phone, fumbling to switch on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the walls, the furniture, and the empty space where the shadow had stood moments before. But as he scanned the room, the whisper returned, closer now, a chorus of voices blending together, rising and falling in a language he couldn't recognize. The shadows seemed to swarm, clustering in the corners, forming shapes that defied logic. Marcus bolted from bed, stumbling to the door, only to find that it refused to open, the lock jammed, the handle cold and unyielding. The temperature dropped further, frost blooming across the glass of the windows. The shadow gathered near the foot of the bed, twisting into the vague outline of a person, tall, featureless, with arms that stretched impossibly long. It beckoned, a silent invitation. Marcus screamed, pounding on the door, desperate to escape. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the door swung open with a creak. Marcus fled into the hallway, gasping for breath, turning only once to look back. Through the gap in the door, he saw the shadow melt away, retreating into the walls as if it had never been there. By morning, the chill had dissipated, and the room appeared perfectly ordinary. But when Marcus checked out, he asked about room 427, only to learn that guests frequently complained of strange noises, unexplained cold spots, and the persistent feeling of being watched. No one had ever been able to explain the phenomena, and the hotel staff simply shrugged, offering polite assurances. Marcus left, vowing never to return, haunted by the memory of the living shadow that had shared his room. Story 2. Screaming Hallway. There are places in the world where sound carries differently. Echoes linger, footsteps seem to follow, and silence is never quite complete. For guests at the historic Grand Mariner Hotel, the third-floor hallway was infamous for its midnight screams. Jessica, a young woman traveling alone, checked into the hotel for a weekend escape. She had heard rumors about the building's past, whispers of tragic accidents, lost loves, and rooms that never stayed booked for long. She dismissed the stories as local color, eager to enjoy her time away from the city. Her room was at the far end of the third floor, past a series of faded portraits and doors that hadn't been opened in years. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, and the hallway was illuminated by a row of flickering sconces. On her first night, Jessica noticed nothing unusual, aside from the distant creaks and groans typical of aging buildings. But at midnight, as she lay reading, a piercing scream shattered the quiet. It was unmistakable. A woman's voice, high and desperate, echoing down the hallway. Jessica sat bolt upright, adrenaline surging. She listened, heart pounding, as the scream faded into sobs, then silence. She opened her door, looking out into the corridor. The hallway was empty, the lights dim. Doors remained closed, and no one else seemed disturbed. Jessica hesitated, then stepped out, her bare feet cold against the worn carpet. She walked toward the sound, stopping in front of a door halfway down the hall. It was unmarked, its surface scarred by deep scratches, as if someone had clawed at it over the years. The scream came again, this time louder, almost inhuman in its intensity. Jessica reached for the doorknob, but it was locked tight. She knocked, calling out, but received no answer. The sobbing continued, rising and falling, mingling with strange whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Terrified, Jessica retreated to her room, locking the door and barricading it with a chair. She tried to sleep, but every few minutes, another scream would ring out, followed by the sound of footsteps running up and down the hallway. At dawn, the noises stopped, and the corridor was eerily quiet once more. Determined to understand what she had heard, Jessica questioned the staff at breakfast. They exchanged nervous glances, reluctant to speak. Finally, the oldest receptionist explained that the hallway had been the site of a tragedy decades earlier. A young woman, distraught over a lost love, had locked herself in one of the rooms and never emerged. Her cries for help were ignored by guests who assumed she was merely emotional, and by the time anyone investigated, it was too late. Since then, guests reported screams and sobbing, always at midnight, always from the same stretch of hallway. Some claimed to see a figure pacing the corridor, her face twisted in anguish, her voice echoing through the walls. The staff had tried everything to quiet the disturbances, but the screams persisted, a nightly reminder of the pain that lingered in the building. Jessica finished her stay, but she never forgot the haunting cries of the screaming hallway. Whenever she checked into a new hotel, she listened for echoes in the corridors, wary of the secrets that old buildings might keep. Story 3: Baby Crying. Few sounds are as universally unsettling as the cry of an infant, especially when heard in the dead of night in a place where no child should be. For guests at the secluded Mountain View Inn, the source of the midnight crying remained an unsolved mystery, one that drove more than one visitor to leave in terror. Aaron and his wife, Olivia, arrived at the inn for a romantic weekend, drawn by the promise of mountain views and quiet solitude. The building was charming, its rooms filled with antique furniture and thick quilts, and the staff was warm and welcoming. Their suite was on the second floor, overlooking the valley below. On their first night, the couple fell asleep easily, lulled by the sound of wind through the trees. But just after midnight, Olivia was awakened by a faint, persistent crying. At first, she thought it was a dream, but the sound grew louder, echoing through the walls. It was the unmistakable wail of a baby, desperate and inconsolable. She woke Aaron, and together they listened, unsettled by the intensity of the sobs. The inn was small, and as far as they knew, no other guests had children. Olivia ventured into the hallway, following the sound to the far end near the attic stairs. The crying seemed to come from behind a locked door, old and warped by time. She knocked, but there was no response, just the endless crying, rising and falling in the darkness. Olivia returned to their room, shaken. The couple tried to sleep, but the crying persisted, sometimes seeming to move, as if the baby was crawling through the walls, searching for comfort. The next morning, Olivia mentioned the disturbance to the innkeeper, who paled and grew quiet. She explained that no children were staying at the inn, and that the staff had heard the crying for years. Some believed it was the spirit of a child who had died in the building long ago, lost and searching for its mother. Curious and unnerved, Aaron and Olivia spent the day exploring, speaking with other guests and staff. The story they pieced together was tragic. Decades earlier, the inn had been a boarding house, and a fire had swept through the upper floors. Several guests perished, including a young mother and her infant child. It was said that the mother's spirit had moved on, but the baby remained, its cries echoing through the halls, unheard and unanswered. That night, the couple tried to ignore the sounds, but the crying was louder than ever, punctuated by soft thumps and distant giggles. Aaron swore he saw a small shadow dart across the hallway, but when he turned, nothing was there. Olivia felt a cold breeze brush past her, and the air grew heavy with the scent of smoke. Unable to bear it, the couple packed their bags and left before dawn, the memory of the crying baby following them long after they returned home. The innkeeper admitted that many guests had done the same, unable to cope with the nightly wails. The Mountain View Inn remains open, its rooms cozy and inviting, but those who stay know to expect more than just the comforts of home. The crying of the lost child is a nightly reminder that some tragedies never fade, and that the walls of every hotel hold stories waiting to be heard.